The stories shared in this podcast reflect personal experiences and perspectives. While names and identifying details may be changed, these accounts are told truthfully to the best of our knowledge. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as fact about any specific individual or organisation without independent verification. Our intention is to share experiences, not to cause harm or defame. This podcast deals with themes of emotional abuse, manipulation, and deception. We share these stories not to sensationalize, but to understand how it happens, why it's so hard to see from the inside, and what it takes to break free. Please take care while listening.
I can't forget what you said. It was reckless to use those words. Now I'm stuck on you, and I keep having these dreams where you run away from me, and I know it's not real, but I'm lost on how to feel.
The human brain assumes sincerity. We assume that emotion is evidence of emotion, that tears reflect grief, that affection reflects care, that love reflects love. But personality research has repeatedly complicated that assumption, particularly in relation to what psychologists call the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. One of the more unsettling realities of these personalities is that they're often highly fluent in human emotion. Sometimes, this is referred to as emotional mimicry, the construction of a self designed specifically for the audience standing in front of it. Learned behaviour that's performed convincingly enough to feel real, which means people like this can often appear extraordinarily compelling, charming, attentive, magnetic. But, as is the hubris of man, characters are usually exposed. And when that happens, one might observe that suddenly facts shift. Conversations never happened. Evidence is misinterpreted. And the real problem is no longer the behaviour itself, but the person exposing it. Because for some people, identity is not a stable truth. It's actually a performance. And when that mask finally slips, the horror is not just that someone lied to you. It's that you're forced to confront a far more frightening possibility, that the person you thought you knew may never have existed in the way you believe that they did at all. Okay, so let's talk about the boyfriend experience.
Before we get into the detail of this final month, I need to give you a snapshot of what it really looked like. Because being inside it, everything felt fragmented. Each conflict felt separate, and each explanation felt like it might make sense if I just thought about it long enough. But when I step back, I see the same pattern that had formed over the preceding 11 months. But it was escalating really quickly, and there are a few crucial things that I think had shifted. This was a month where reality was constantly being rewritten, where every time something didn't add up, the focus somehow shifted back onto me, where I was explaining myself for things I hadn't done, while also trying to ignore these things that were just overtly happening in front of me. What I recognize was happening now was an extreme version of something called DAVO: deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. It's a manipulative tactic used to deflect accountability, but when it's done well, and he did it well, it didn't just shift the blame from him, it completely destabilized me. It created this self-doubt and confusion, and it completely eroded my ability to trust my own perception of what was real. And his version of it wasn't this basic flip the blame. It felt like he was strategic and he was layered with it, and he was relentless. He understood the psychology of it as well. He knew how to escalate it, he knew how to twist things, how to keep it just convincing enough that I'd start to question myself before I questioned him. He would deny something outright, and then he'd reprimand me for even raising it with him, and then literally, within minutes, the conversation would change and I would be the one explaining myself. I would be apologizing. I'd be trying to repair with him something that I hadn't broken in the first place. And then it would go even further. He would start accusing me of doing the exact thing that he was doing, using the language and the concepts of the psychology behind it. And he'd be calling out this manipulation while actively manipulating me. Not only was I being pulled into this distorted version of reality, I was being told that I was the one distorting it. And over time, that did something quite serious to me. It didn't just confuse me, it started to fracture my sense of what was true, my sense of self, and most importantly, my sense of safety. And then suddenly, everything started to terrify me. At the same time, his life was starting to unravel.
Was it unraveling? Or was his life just exactly what it had always been?
I don't think a lot had actually changed. I think it had just become a lot more apparent to me that the environment around him was unstable and unsafe. It was pretty much chaos, and you're right, it was pretty much chaos most of the time. And I wasn't just dealing with the abuse, I was trying to help him hold all of these things together. I was trying to stabilize things and support him, be the person that stayed when everything was falling apart, be his 100% backer. When people ask me why I didn't just up and leave, again, it's not a simple answer at all because I wasn't just in a relationship. I was in something that felt like it required constant management and care, concession, this constant responsibility. It's interesting because I started seeing a therapist after the relationship ended, and she told me I was case managing him.
That's such an interesting point because it does appear like how you were handling this was almost clinical.
Yeah, I wasn't really fighting back and I wasn't arguing points with him. I wasn't necessarily trying to prove my innocence. I started to agree with him and try to fix it that way, concede. Yes, you're right. I've done these things. Let me fix it. I lent into the fix it as the cure for whatever the heck was going on. And it sounds like I was being composed and reasonable, but it wasn't coming from this strength and this control. It was coming from a survival point of view. I just wanted to get past whatever was happening.
Can I ask you a question?
Mm.
Why did you think that you would get past this? What in the 11 months had suggested that it would be anything other than what it was?
Can I say delusion? And I mean that sincerely. I think at this point, I had deluded myself into believing this version of him that I had held in my head or my heart or wherever you hold
Let's say
these things.
convinced. You'd convinced yourself.
I'd convinced myself that the version of him that I had seen at the beginning, and I don't want to sound cliche because I know a lot of actually, it's not cliche at all. It is just how it is. It's the pattern, right? I think the difference between Danny and the obvious love bombing we see on, social media throws in our face is that he didn't do it in this way that was like buying me flowers every week and promising full commitment immediately and all of these things. He did it in a really subtle way that seemed sincere. And so I think I just had not wanted to let go of that. And the deeper I got in with him, the more issues that started to appear. It was just I didn't wanna sink the cost maybe, or my mental health couldn't sink the cost. I think the dissonance would have destroyed me if I had just given in and gone, "He was a monster all along."
And also maybe you just weren't ready to see it. I think you'd anchored yourself to him. I think reflecting on the conversation we had in the last episode about why you went to him on your birthday, what's interesting to me in hearing it is he became your place of torture, but your place of safety as well. So he sort of made himself your whole universe in that. And I think that that's an incredibly powerful position to be in. You wanted the safety of this thing that only you and he existed in, even if it wasn't actually safe for you.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because just thinking back now, I think just recently I've hit this moment of clarity of going, "Wow, I was all in on this relationship, and I don't think he had many stakes in it at all. And I mean, he put a lot of energy into what he was doing, but I don't think he was emotionally in this. And that was a huge realization for me. And it's sad to say out loud and to realize, but it's also like there's some relief in that because I haven't lost the thing because it never existed in the first place. And you talk about being anchored to him, and it's a really great segue into talking about the loss of sense of self and how that's tied to identity as well. And I really started to identify as this relationship.
Mm.
I had gone from being this independent person on my own, and then I had completely flipped into this, I'm in this for forever love. I believed in soulmates, like, I had completely changed, and I identified with the hope of this relationship, or not even the I just he took over my life, and that was in all kinds of ways. That was every waking minute. He was in my thoughts, not for good reasons.
It got to a point where he was the first thing you thought about when you woke up. He was the last thing you thought about that when you went to bed, and he was everything you thought about in between. I don't know that there are very many moments in that you were thinking about you. You know, he had completely replaced you in that. He had made the we him.
Yeah. Truly. It was the Danni show
Mm.
100%. I remember saying to you after the relationship ended, I don't want this to become my identity. I don't wanna be this broken person that remains his victim forever. And I never realized how much it already had in a way. I had to recover from that. That's something I'm having to crawl back from, and certainly getting there, but man, it's taken a long time. By this time that we're going to be covering in this episode, I was physically falling apart. I wasn't sleeping. I was having panic attacks. My period completely stopped for about 4 months. I was getting skin rashes. I had migraines constantly. I had blurred vision. I was hearing ringing in my ears. I was really starting to feel the toll of the stress that I had been experiencing for the past year. And it was just this high alert all of the time. There were moments where the pressure of it all felt so inescapable that my mind went to completely dark places. And it wasn't because I didn't want to live, it was because in those moments, it felt like it was just the only way to make it stop. And that's the part that's really hard to explain because from the outside, and even now, I question myself and there might seem like there were more obvious ways out, like the door, just go out the door. But when you're in it, your thinking completely narrows. Your options don't feel like options at all. They just feel like this unreachable self-control. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but I wasn't in control of myself anymore. And then this detachment from myself, I thought I could manage it. I had again, I don't want to keep using the word, but it felt like a delusion. I thought I could somehow stabilize everything. I thought if I just stayed calm and I didn't react and I didn't push too hard, it might somehow hold all together. And the truth is, if nothing had disrupted that belief, I probably would have gone back again and again. It didn't end because I found this strength and suddenly walked out the door. It ended because something finally shattered the version of that reality I've been holding on to. And once that broke, everything else followed.
So let's talk about what broke it and how you got to the point of finally seeing the truth of who Danny was.
So, as we mentioned, Danny and I decided to give it another try. The thing is, I didn't tell anyone about it, and I didn't tell anyone about it for a while. I kind of just, I don't know. Usually I would. Like, I'd tell people things. I'm an open book with my friends. I tell my friends most of my life, as you know, Keeks. But I didn't say anything. I had really started to withdraw myself from my group of friends. And I don't know if it was a guilt thing or if I was afraid of the humiliation if it failed again. But I can tell you it got pretty horrid pretty quickly after we reunited.
I think my perception of it from the outside wasn't that you were keeping anything. What it struck me as was you trying to show that you were strong enough to handle it. There wasn't any of us, I think, that would have been shocked to know that you and Danny were back together. But I really just felt like how you were positioning yourself as someone who was in control, who was strong enough to go down this path, and who could very clearly lead him through what he was going through.
It's so strange, isn't it? Because I think I was doing a pretty good job of, like,
Yeah.
keeping up those appearances. Not long after we had reunited, I recall the weekend after my birthday, Mel had arranged to take me out for a birthday lunch, and he knew about it. I told him about it during the week, and I think I was meant to go to his house on the Sunday, and I said I'd just drive on the Sunday morning. And then I changed my mind, and I just said, "Hey, is it okay if I come to your house after I have lunch with Mel?" And he says to me, "Oh, I would love it if you'd come to my house." He was ecstatic that I was coming to his house all of a sudden, but the thing was he had actually, because I had said that I wasn't coming, he had made plans to be helping a client out, with an appointment on Saturday evening, and that he would be available for me around 10 p.m. on Saturday night after he'd had this client over.
Sorry. Saturday evening, finished at 10 p.m. A client? Did he usually see clients late into the evening on Saturdays?
No, Keeks, this was really odd to me, and it felt off. Immediately felt off, but I did not wanna cause another fight. I knew it would happen if I was kinda like, "Yeah, what? Why?
Yeah,
That
the
seems
fuck?
really unethical." Like, I don't know. You're not an emergency psychologist. Anyway, it didn't make sense to me, and so I kinda just retreated, and I just went quiet because I didn't know what to say without being confrontational. So I just said, "How about I just see you tomorrow? I'll just come in the morning." And then this just instigated this problematic conversation between us where he was kinda like, "I've done something wrong, haven't I?" And I just said I wanted to be honest, and I just said, "Well, I find it a little bit strange that you're seeing a client late on a Saturday evening, but, I don't know. It's fine. I should have not left my plans to the last minute, and that's okay." And then it just was this weird rant that came from Danny because I think he was actually doing something suspicious. So, he had to do this usual deflection and turn it into something that it wasn't. He told me this client was super vulnerable, they were homeless, they'd been living in their car, and he was helping them with some kind of application, and it was this really urgent thing, and they were just both conveniently available because, he was waiting around for me to be available, and I was busy, and so because he wasn't doing anything else but spending his whole life with me, he thought he'd just take this opportunity to work, but he'd laced the message, with all of this language that hinted that I was really controlling and that I'd been reprimanding him for being this humanitarian, and not surprisingly, it was just incredibly bizarre.
Um, just a few things there. An incredibly vulnerable patient who is homeless. They both happen to be free on a Saturday evening working on an application. You don't actually need to say
Yeah.
anything. I'm just gonna leave it there. Nothing about that sentence is fine. Keep talking.
Regardless, he told me he would cancel the appointment, and then he asked me to come and see him in person that night. I wasn't engaged in any kind of drama about it. I was just trying to be casual and be like, "Okay, well, if you're sure." I think he was trying to make me out to be this, like, malevolent, evil person that had forced him to kick this vulnerable homeless person to the curb so that he could spend the night with me. But anyway, we went with it. But because I had lunch with Mel, I was also not staring at my phone the whole time. And so I just said, "Okay, I love you. I'll see you later." And then I disengaged from my phone and had my lunch. And he continued his conversation as he does, like to text. And then he tried to call, and I wasn't answering because I was at lunch with Mel, which he knew about. And then it just really got bad, and I had seen after the lunch that he'd been contacting me, and I was immediately like, "I'm so sorry, I had put my phone away. Like, please, I'm so sorry. Nothing's wrong. I love you. I'll come over this evening as planned. Like, nothing's a problem. And then he got pretty awful pretty quickly. I was on my way to his house and he was just in a mood. And I don't know, I think I had disrupted something that he had planned to be doing, and he was pretty pissed off about it. And then suddenly it became this narrative that he couldn't do anything with me needing his attention all the time. And I was trying my hardest to de-escalate and tell him I loved him. And I was like, "Do you need me to get anything for you on the way?" I was just trying to be calm. And I just had to wait in these moments, I just had to wait until he'd gotten all this drama out of his system. There was no way of actually de-escalating. It just had to sort of wear itself out. And anyway, I got there, things had wound down, but something really key happened that night. And it seems benign at this point, but it kind of was something that instigated me understanding a lot more about this, what did we say earlier? This unraveling of his life. I think it just kinda opened the blinds for me and made me see what was actually going on. And so we were looking at something on his phone, and this was around midnight, and a text popped up from a woman that we will call Sarah, saying something like, "Are you still working, babe?" And it was kinda like that moment where he knew I saw it and I saw it and
Mm.
kinda didn't really say anything and just ignored it because given the turmoil that had unfolded, I didn't wanna cause any more issues, and so we just carried on with the evening. It's actually so strange because I know what jealousy feels like, but I didn't feel jealous when that message popped up. I felt really worried, and I don't know why, but I just did. But also, I had been in a relationship with him for the past year, and I didn't know who this person was. I know we all have friends that we hadn't seen in years and they might pop up again. This wasn't that kind of message. It was kinda like, "Are you still working, babe, at midnight on a Saturday?" If I hadn't heard of her yet, who was she? That it was just eerie, an eerie feeling. The following day was a day with his kids, so he had gone to collect them, but he was gone for a long while, which was odd because it usually only would take him 5 minutes. He then called me from the car and told me the police had intercepted him on the pathway on going into his ex-wife's home. And he said they were there to discuss the incident that had occurred in August, and that had kind of just slipped off the radar, completely forgotten about it. He said they had planned to actually charge him, but he had said to them that he hadn't heard anything from them and he hadn't even had a chance to provide a statement. So he told me they allowed him to present the following week before issuing him the charge. He told me his ex-wife started questioning him about why the police had been there, and rightly so, and he had told her it was because of an assault, and then he tried to sort of say, "It's private, I don't have to tell you." And then apparently she wouldn't let him take the children that day, and so he came home childless. I don't think his ex-wife was involved in the conversation with the police, so I don't think she actually could hear what was being said. Well, that's what he had told me. He told me what had happened, and I immediately went into this fix-it mode. I was trying my best to be caring and supportive because I just didn't want him to spiral, and spiraling usually meant deflection and, putting some kind of blame onto me. So he very much lent into the victim mode. I've never seen him actually look worried. He looked really worried, and so I was trying to comfort him and reassure him that whatever it was gonna be minor. He's never done anything like this before, it was gonna be so fine, and then he started questioning my care for him. He started saying that things like, "It's really nice that you're being supportive, but it's really hard for me to trust you because of how awful I'd been in the past towards him and how I had accused him of horrible things, and so he just couldn't trust he didn't think my kindness at the time was sincere and that I didn't care really." And then this became a theme for the next 4 weeks because I really amped up my support and help for him, my practical help for him as well. And any time I would try to do this, he would simply bring up how I had deceived him or how I had hurt him, and he just wouldn't move past it. Over the following days, I really lent into helping him. I prioritized finding him legal support. I started researching what the legislation was. I knew that there had been some changes, and I was trying to provide him with some comfort that, this would just be a warning or diversion rather than a charge that would result in destroying his life. And I tried to remain positive because I think I was freaking out a little bit. I really wanted him to be okay. I wanted this to be okay. But he kind of sank into this performative hopelessness. He was annoyed at my insistence for him to engage with a lawyer. And, he was also taking advice from this newfound friend group of his who he had said had experience with law enforcement in the past. So,
Good.
firsthand experience. So it was frustrating because I just wanted him to do it the right way. This is one thing I just wanted him to do the right way. Despite how much I was actually trying to get him through this, he always found a way to remind me that I was a liar and a problem. It was really strange, but I think we understand now is that if he could write a list of all the things I had done wrong, his list didn't seem so long sitting next to it. And so he kept bringing up my friend Jeremy and how I had concealed this relationship from him and that I had lied and how painful it had been for him. And then after a few solid hours of being reminded of how awful I had hurt him, mind you, this was after helping him engage lawyers and supporting him all day, I thought I'd bring up the message he'd received at midnight the previous Saturday from some random woman calling him babe. And I think I did this just to subtly demonstrate the hypocrisy in what he'd been saying to me and what he'd been accusing me of. He told me she was a client that he was helping out with an application. And this led to him explaining to me his involvement with a bunch of people. And from this, I really started to understand who Danny was or who he was becoming or who he had become. I don't know. The curtains opened. Sarah was also very Googleable. And she had quite a public history, which kind of confirmed my concerns about her past involvements and that of the other people that had started surrounding Danny. But because he was forced to reveal to me who this person was, he then really amped up the whole me having a secret relationship with my ex who was in America, and it just never stopped. There's this interesting text that Danny sent me that I think demonstrates this entire vibe, which says, "It's okay. Your secret relationship and ongoing lies and betrayal and love leaning on Jeremy has to be cleaned out. It cannot be ongoing while we claim closeness. We can do it."
I just need to emotional affairs, I understand it, right? I'm not saying you can't have a secret relationship with someone who doesn't live in the same place. But I guess just were you? Where did this come from? Like, honest to God, were you?
No, 0% was I.
You had known this person for a decade. And yes, it started off romantic, but a decade of friendship built on that. The assumption that you've been having this secret relationship with this person would also mean that you've been having a secret relationship with this person for 10 years. That doesn't make any sense.
And I just wasn't. And, when you're not doing something and someone keeps accusing of
Yes.
doing it, like what evidence do you need to provide to say I'm not doing it? Like, I just wasn't doing it. And, I was really starting to break down at this point because it was just these hopeless conversations. God, I shouldn't even call them conversations. It's just these constant interrogations of my integrity and, the things I was apparently doing. And I wasn't coping. I wasn't sleeping more than 1 to 2 hours a night, if at all. I was constantly worried about Danny.
When you say you were worried about him, what is it that you were actually worried about?
I was worried about everything. I was worried about the charges and the implications of those on his career. I was worried about his children. I was particularly worried about the people who started presenting in his life. And, when someone's friend group suddenly changes and their behaviors are changing as well, it could be a telltale sign of drug issues. And, I had really thought that he was struggling with addiction prior to this. And so, yeah, maybe infidelity was a thing, but it didn't concern me. It was all this other pressures, all this other stuff that could go wrong. And, I go to his house and I recall I'd just sit there, right? I was at this point, I used to go there and I would clean it. I would clean his house. But at this point, I would just go there and I just sat and I would look around and I'd see the strangest things. Just, it was messy and I would just look and, he didn't drink, but there were cans of bourbon and there were women's clothing in his clinic and like a bra in his laundry basket in his bedroom. And they weren't mine. And then like I'd found a suitcase in his closet at one point and it had a woman's corset in it and a little bag of blue pills, and I'd never seen that before. And then there was this bank card in his room that had someone's name on it that I didn't know whose name it was. And, a can of butane in one corner of the room and then an enema device in the other corner, and like just these really inanimate objects that I never noticed before. But these, they probably knew far more about Danny's goings on than I did.
Was he still seeing patients at this time?
He was, but he'd moved predominantly to telehealth. He was run off his feet. He was back to back always. He was very busy. That was the story I got all the time.
So what's interesting in hearing all that is it feels very much like a lot of the narrative for you had switched back into him being an addict and to meth as the problem. But in hearing all of these things, it feels like there were a lot of other problems, drug usage obviously being one, but not a lot of addiction concerns. What was the thing that made you anchored in him as an addict at this point?
I think it was the subtle things that I was noticing. It was, yes, the people in his life that just suddenly appeared and to me presented as drug users. It was his behavior. He was becoming particularly volatile. And he had sworn to me black and blue that he wasn't touching any drugs. And so as I'm observing all of the things in his house, I saw a meth pipe sitting on top of his fridge. And I see a little vial of liquid in his cupboard. And I didn't know what it was at the time, but I Googled it and apparently ketamine comes in a liquid. And so, I was observing all these things and putting the pieces together, and I didn't want to approach him about it because I knew where that would lead. Uh, So I guess I just kept telling myself this story in my head that in fact it was still a problem.
So you're going to his house, you're still trying to, return to the new honeymoon phase of this return to the relationship, and you're seeing all these really weird things. I mean, an enema device is that's a thing. Did you ever try to talk to him about any of it?
I think I did in my own way, and I I really wanted to express my concerns, and my concerns were about the chaos and the potential continued drug use, but I just couldn't. I think I was just too broken at this stage. I think I was too terrified to cause more conflict. Well, I don't think I could ever have had that conversation with him safely because he would just always flip the narrative. So I was constantly panicking, and I'd try and raise it with him and it would go wrong, and then I'd end up apologizing, trying to explain my relationship with Jeremy to him because that was his main deflection tool at this point. I would raise a concern and then it would be like, "You were a liar and you cheated with the man who lives in America." And, I just needed to fix the whole Jeremy story. I needed it to go away. I needed to be like, nothing is happening with Jeremy. And so in an attempt to demonstrate that to him and how innocent the friendship actually was, I told him that I would share my phone screen with him. So we would video call and I would share my screen and show him my text exchanges with Jeremy. So he could actually see, the conversations with my friend. And they weren't controversial at all. It was just two friends who had known each other for a very long time, and we would confide in each other and we would share jokes, and it was just mundane shit. And, most of the time it was Jeremy sharing his dating experiences with me, and they were funny. And, I didn't think it was a threat to Danny at all. I thought showing him would be the fix. But all he saw, I think, out of everything that I showed him was this one instance where I called Jeremy a nickname, which is BB. And I had always called him that for the past 11 years. It just became another piece of arsenal for Danny to use against me. And then I realized I don't think he was ever looking for reassurance that Jeremy and I were just, in fact, friends. He was actually just looking for more weapons. And so I remained the liar, which had now morphed into I was a cheater. I had actually cheated on him. And I had lied and cheated on him for the entire year.
What's so annoying for me about this is he got this incensed by your use of a nickname, which is just 2 letters, BB. But you had seen messages coming from a woman that you didn't know asking if he was still working, babe. You had, bras in a hamper in his bedroom, enemas in his, clinic, and that wasn't something that you could talk about. It's almost laughable that infidelity is the thing that he was trying to throw at you.
It's completely unfathomable because you need to remember this was 3 days in after I had decided to go back to
3
him. This has been
days?
3 days. And I cracked again. I told him I couldn't cope anymore. I wasn't dealing with it anymore. I told him I didn't want the people he had chosen in my life, and I told him that it was never gonna work. Like, I just tried to withdraw again. I was like, "No, cooling off period, let me out." And so, of course, he begged and he did the thing, and then I kinda said, "Well, if you wanna be in a relationship with me, you should let me see your contact with Sarah, the same way that I'd afforded him for Jeremy." And so I kinda sprung it on him as well so he couldn't cover his tracks. I just said, "How about you share your screen with me and show me that I can trust what you're doing?" And anyway, so he does. Surprisingly, shows me these conversations with Sarah, and, he'd known her for quite a few months. She wasn't just a client of his getting a support for an application. He lent her money frequently, amongst other things. She was always at his house. I got really, really scared at this point, and, he tried to weasel his way through an explanation, and I just really started thinking the worst, and rightly so. I stupidly tried to get him to sever ties with these people, and I told him that I was really scared for him, and then he flipped out on me. And, it was me giving him another ultimatum and trying to keep him away from having friends. And so, he was never going to let anybody do that. And nobody gets between him and his friends. The next morning, I hadn't really heard from him after this blow up. And I started to get really worried because his language was also very, I'm going to end things. So on my way to work, I just kept driving and I went straight past work and I went to his house. And that was just so I could see if he was okay. And when I arrived, Sarah was in fact, and this is early in the morning, it probably would have been about 9 by the time I got to his house. Sarah was pulling out of his driveway and I just just stared at her, and I was just staring at her drive past me. And she waved and she was just all like, "Oh, hello," as if we were friends, buddies. And I was just in shock. I just stared at her the whole way. And, Danny later told me that I'd made her cry because of that, because I was so unkind. And I walked up the driveway and I can really remember this day because my body, I think this was a day when I really noticed how physically unwell I was becoming. My body started trembling uncontrollably. I was terrified. And I knocked on the clinic door and there was no answer, and then I just opened it, and when I did, there was this dude in there putting on his socks and shoes, and he kinda looked up at me, and he was a bit shocked that I walked in, and I was just like, "Oh, is Danny home?" And the guy's like, "Oh, I think he's upstairs." So I was just like, "Who even are you, sir?" And so I recall I walked upstairs and Danny was on the phone to a patient. He was doing telehelp, just walking around the house on the phone, and real professional like. And he saw me, and I think he saw how unwell I was, and he also didn't know I was coming. So I think he was wondering what I in fact saw. And so I just went in his room and I froze. I froze in the middle of his room. I couldn't move. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking, and he walks in and he was very gentle and like, "Are you okay? What's going on? What's wrong with you? Oh, yeah, what's happened? Tell me." And so I didn't know what to do. I was just, I don't know if it was fear or shock or like exhaustion. I don't know, but it wasn't good. And so, you know, the contrast in how he was behaving though, compared to the night before where it was just this vitriol, and now it was very caring and he was very concerned about what was wrong with me. And, I laid down on his bed for most of the morning while he did work, and he was he was on telehealth sessions with patients, and he'd come in every now and then to check in on me, and I sort of slowly unfroze and I became myself a little bit. And, you know, it just was like a temporary reset button. It was like, "Oh, okay, everything's good again now. We love each other. All right." Doesn't matter who the reno is downstairs and the woman who drove out of your house at 9 a.m. in the morning. We good. And then eventually, because of this, I just flat out refused to go to his house. I was really scared of going there, to be honest with you. And I started having frequent panic attacks. And because I was really just sort of straight up trying to hide this from everybody, I just didn't want anybody to know it was bad. I wasn't really leaning on people and telling them, I think. I don't think I was being open about how physically unwell I became until the end.
Well, you weren't, I mean, at this point, you hadn't really told people you were back together.
No. Interestingly, I'd had this picnic planned with Mel, and, we were driving on our way to the park, and Danny called, and I put him on speaker, I'm driving, and so he could talk to both Mel and I. And I think Mel at this point thought we were separated, but we were still friendly. And Danny dropped in that I was his girlfriend just casually into conversation. And Mel didn't say anything. She kind of just was like, clocked him, just kept the conversation going. Anyway, after the phone conversation, Mel said to me, "Oh, are you guys back together again?" And I was like, "No," because I was so ashamed of having gone back, and I knew how bad it was going back. And so, I didn't know how to answer that question. And so she was like, "Oh, well, does he know that?" And so I was like, "I think so, but I'll have to." And so I'm like, am the worst liar. And then we
It's
kind
so
of just
true.
like skipped past the conversation, I think. And then I just started feeling so guilty because I'd lied to one of my closest friends. And so I contacted Mel and I was like, "I'm so sorry. I told you a lie. Like, I feel really shitty about telling you the lie. I just didn't know how to tell you." And she was fine with it. She's like, "Jess, it's fine. I understand. It's okay." And he took this as a chance to start sort of questioning me about, have I told everybody? Have I told Jeremy that we were back together? And so this started becoming an issue, was that I hadn't actually told Jeremy, because I was in fact in an emotional relationship with Jeremy. And so, went back to that same argument that I had cheated on him. But then he kind of raised the stakes. He amped it up a little bit, and he said it wasn't just me that had cheated on him. Jeremy had cheated on him. Jeremy had betrayed him. And so he started demanding that Jeremy apologize to him. I was not on board with that. I don't think that I should have involved Jeremy at all. It was not his problem and none of his business, and he had done nothing wrong.
Let's really keep this so clear. Jeremy didn't know Danny. What did Danny actually want him
Which
to
also,
call and apologize?
yes, he did. It also became an issue because he said I should have introduced him by now. And we know he actually didn't want to be introduced to my friend
No, he
Jeremy.
didn't.
It was just something to hold on to. It was another weapon. He in fact got to the point after this where he said he wouldn't be my boyfriend until I stopped being friends with Jeremy. He said he couldn't be with me until I was no longer with Jeremy. And so, this is maybe a week of being back together again, and he has now left me. After a whole day of taunting me about some bullshit, he came to my house unannounced, and I accidentally it's not funny because of where it ended, but I accidentally called him Bud, and that w that was a name he suggested that I call Jeremy instead of BB, and I wasn't trying to be a smartass, it just fell out of my mouth. And then I think I even sent him a message being like, "Keeks calls me Bud all the time because you fucking do." So I was trying to be like, "No, it was just an accident." And so he lost his shit at me that night, and he stormed out of my house, and he told me he was gonna kill himself. And he told me he was gonna call the police on me and tell them that I had been torturing him, and that's why he was gonna kill himself. He told me that he was gonna crash his car. So I was terrified. I tried to call him, and he was messaging me just saying, "I'm crashing, I'm crashing, I'm crashing. You need to call an ambulance. I'm dying." And then I finally got through. I was trying to call him, and he was just full volume screaming down the phone at me that he was going to crash the car and that he was fucking doing it. And then he hung up on me. And I will never forget the phone call. I was having nightmares about him crashing his car for days after this. It completely ruined me, that moment. I don't know what happened. I think the just peak of fear of what could happen in this relationship just really hit me all at once. And, he obviously didn't actually do that. He was probably doing 40 down the road from my house and not, in fact, on the highway at all. But it put me right back in my place.
I think what's interesting in listening to this is fundamentally, it's the same cycle that we've discussed this entire time, the same cycle for 11 months, which is high highs and low lows, with the highs feeling like the reason to stay, right? But at this point, the highs are kind of just pretty limp, and the lows are like Mariana Trench deep wounds. These are necrotic tissue, and the highs are just kind of maybe a little bit of penicillin, and let's hope it gets to it. But I can hear in how you're talking about this and the way that you were responding when I think about you at the time, you really wanted those sort of little bit of penicillin on necrotic tissue things to be wins. You wanted them to be wins, and it was giving you the same endorphin release as the high highs and the love bombing was back in the beginning. Cycle the same, just a different playing field.
Yeah. And, this wasn't a problem to be fixed. There was nothing that was going to resolve any of this.
No.
And that was my biggest mistake, was thinking that I could fix any of it, because it was entirely unsolvable by design. What's really interesting for me is, this cycle was really similar. And I don't know what was happening to me. I look at this and I'm just like, where were you? What was happening to your mind? Because I can't recognize some of the responses. But, I started making really big declarations of love. That was my response in the end. Like, I wouldn't even argue. I'd just be like, "I love you and you're my forever and I'm here always and I'm never letting go." Like, just these ridiculous declarations and commitments to him while he's treating me like absolute shit. Like the worst of the worst.
The big declarations of love feel like you're trying to find a way back to safety. And maybe there's something in the words that are just, if I remind him that we are in love and that this is a loving and safe place, he will find his way back to safety.
I think I was playing the role that he had set me up to play. And it was like I was an abused dog. And, when you go to pat an abused dog and they flinch, or they'll roll over and show their belly to show that they're not a threat, I think I was just showing that I wasn't a threat. And that was the best way I could think to do it, was just to go, "Hey, I love you. Whatever you're saying about me, I love you." And I think it just got really bad for me. I think I was just completely absorbed by it.
So you have shared a lot of incredibly vulnerable aspects of who you are. and of a very challenging story over the last 8 episodes. And I think it's important to recognize the impact that has in going back into these dark places and reliving who you were at the time and what was happening to you. There's one really major incident that we do need to go back into, and this one I feel tentative asking you to recall. Can you talk to me about the weekend that you went to the children's concert?
So, months before any of this had happened, I had arranged with a close friend of mine to go with Danny and his children and her 2 children to this children's concert. Wayne was coming along as well. It was gonna be this day out. So, it was getting closer to the weekend, and there was a moment of softness, I guess you could call it, and things were kind of okay, I guess. And so I had said, "I'll book us a hotel, and we can spend the night together and reset and kinda reconnect a little bit because things have been so horrible. And then the next day, we'll go together, and we'll take the kids to this concert, and it's gonna be happy families." We go to this hotel, and it was a really happy evening, an unusually happy evening. We went and got dinner together, and he was particularly happy because I think Trump had been re-elected around this time, and so cryptocurrency skyrocketed, and his crypto balance was really high, and he was really happy with himself about it. And we went to a barber, and he got his hair cut, and I was sitting there watching him, all happy. Everything was nice. And then we went back to the hotel after dinner, hand in hand, like a happy couple, and we were sitting in the room, there's something on TV, and he had brought his guitar and a bag full of things. I don't know what was in the bag, we never had the chance to look at it, but he starts restringing this guitar, and then he suddenly sinks into this really somber mood, just out of nowhere. And I was really confused. I was like, "Is everything okay?" And he sort of gets really sulky and says, "I just need some time. Leave me alone." And, this is a small hotel room. So I just sit on the bed and I'm watching the TV for a minute, and I was like, "Is there anything I did? Like, can I do anything?" And he was like, "No, you can't do anything, because you refuse to do anything about it." And so he starts questioning me about, the fact that I had cancelled our second date way back when.
11 months
Becau
ago.
11 months earlier.
11 months ago.
Well,
That's just,
12
you know.
months earlier, really. And so he starts saying, "Why did you have pink eye?" And it's not funny,
She
but
didn't
it
have
kind
pink.
of I didn't have pink eye. I just had an itchy eye, and I didn't really wanna go on a date. And so
I don't think that that's something, every girl wants to look her best on the second date with someone she thinks she might actually like. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that when you have what, we can joke about as being pink eye, you thought, "Oh,
it's just
maybe I'll just reschedule." God.
and, you know, the ridiculousness of how this began, contrasted with the seriousness of where it ended up, is just, uh, it's probably probably a really good, metaphor for the entire relationship, really. Because I was literally sitting on the bed being like, "No, no, I I didn't have pink eye, but I was just joking that I had pink eye because my eye was really sore and itchy." And the reason he was questioning me about having pink eye is because he was suggesting the reason I had pink eye is because I had, in fact, slept with another person before seeing him, which also wouldn't have been a problem because I wasn't, in fact, in a relationship with him. I had met him one time. And so instead of me standing my ground and saying, "It doesn't matter what I had and what I was doing because we weren't in a relationship," I said, no, let me show you the evidence. And so I'm ridiculously going through my text messages because I had remembered, Keeks, that I had sent you a picture of my face that morning and I
Yeah.
looked hideous. And so I had to prove to him that I had this swollen eye. And so I find this picture and it was horrible. It's a horrible photo of me. And I was kind of like, I'll just show you my eye because the picture's so horrible. But he was
Let's
like,
be fair for a quick second. You're a beautiful woman. It was horrible because you were trying to make it look horrible because funny, but yes,
but
carry on.
then I didn't want to show him the picture because it was so ugly. And so then he got suspicious about why I didn't want to show him the entire picture. What else is on your face? And I was like, nothing, just my fucking ugly face. And so I showed him the picture. It didn't even matter because he was suggesting that it was a problem that I had cancelled our date. And then he was saying I didn't see him again for another 20 days. And then it became this it didn't make any sense where this came from. And I don't really recall how we got from me sort of lightly trying to prove the pink eye situation to where it ended up. But it just escalated. He started interrogating me again. And he put the guitar down and he got up and he positioned himself again in the corner of the room, just like the same night that had happened a few weeks earlier. And he sat in the corner of the room and he got his phone out and he turned on this music. And it is of this Native American woman singing a chant. And it was just so eerie and strange. And he just put it down and had this music playing. And he was questioning me about all kinds of things. And then it escalated. He got quite aggressive about it. And I just couldn't answer the questions because they just didn't make any sense to me. And it was the same kind of questioning that I've spoken about before, but it was just getting really ridiculous. And mind you, I'm really not coping with a lot at this point, and so I was just falling apart on this bed. And in an attempt to sort of de-escalate because he was getting quite heightened and quite aggressive, I said to him, "Can I please record this conversation? I need to record this." And I think I said that I wanted to record it for my own understanding, or I don't know, so I could comply, I suppose. But when I turned on the recording, he softened a little bit. But
I
listening
would
back to
just say a very little bit. He softened a very little bit, and not that I was in the room or know before, but I have listened to this recording. It, he's he's not trying to be kind. It's almost like it doesn't matter to him that there might be evidence of what's there. At what point I think he says to you, lower your voice, and so you start whispering. And he said, yes, that's better for me because when you speak loudly, it offends me, and that's abuse for me.
it and like the contents of the conversation as well. I can't understand. I think I can talk from my perspective in that I was hysterical, and not in a way where I was loudly hysterical. I was just trying my best, but I was not okay. I wasn't in the room as me anymore. I was in the room as the beaten dog, I think. And I was sobbing and I was trying to answer his questions. He started questioning me about being sober and why I don't drink anymore. He started questioning me about not wanting to be reckless and have sex with him. Side note, we were in a hotel room together and he decided to do this rather than be intimate with his partner. It just didn't make sense to me. And then it just got bonkers. And, this music's playing. I don't know what was going on. It just got, he was doing something. And I don't know how to explain what that something was, but it was very intentional.
I think it's this is a really scary recording to listen to, and I know I said in an early episode that when you got back from Europe, I had this deep fear, or just the words came out of my mouth that I think he might kill her. This message is why it was almost putting, and I listened to this after you had finally broken up, but it was the way he was taking dominance of the room. It was the way he was expressing violence without expressing violence. I think there was a water bottle there, but he was using it to effect, and so all you could hear was this movement and this heaviness and this kind of, when he said it was okay to speak, you could. And I heard you go deeply into this incredibly monotone way of speaking as he would start to escalate, and all it read for me was fear. 100% through and through was you being completely terrified of what might happen if you said the wrong word.
And I think that's exactly it. I think it was just I did not want to misstep, but silence wasn't an option because silence was a misstep. I had to
Yeah.
fulfill the request of the question. So I got to a point, I think I remember it been going on for a while and I was exhausted. And I just stood up and I walked outside onto the balcony because I just needed to get out of the room. And this baffles me to this day, right? Because there were 2 doors in that room. There was one out into the balcony and there was one out to leave the room. And I can't understand why leaving the room wasn't the option for me. And so I went out onto the balcony and I just stared. I was just staring at, we were probably 21 floors up. And so it was a really high room. And so when I was out there, there was no talking, but I could hear the music faintly playing in the room behind me. And I just recall being like, I've got to go. I've got to leave because I can't sit on that bed any longer. And it sounds crazy because it is just words being said to me and there was another option. But, I think he knew at that point that it had become too much. And he walked out and he just gently said to me, "Please come back inside. You need to come back inside now." And so I did. So I went back inside and took my place on the bed again and he sat down in the corner where he was. And he was intimately getting up and, having swigs of this water bottle, and he certainly was showing me that he was controlling that room. And he started questioning me about why I won't let him be aggressive with me and how I had given so much to other men and that it wasn't their fault, it was my fault. And it was just the same circles of questioning and making me verify things. And when was the last time I had a drink? Because I said I didn't drink much anymore. And so I was trying to reason with him through these things and it wasn't working. And it was so, I think you're right. I think I just fell into this monotone and was just trying to be compliant. And I think he just got bored of it in the end. I think that's how that phase ended. And yeah, it was, I'm done. We need to get some sleep. This had been going on for hours again. And we really did need to get some sleep because we were spending the day with the children the next day. And so he said, "Let's go to bed. It's over now." And I stopped the recording and I just crawled into a ball and lay down. And I didn't face him. And it just didn't get any better from there.
There's a message that you shared with me, and to be fair, sorry, are you happy for me to read this out?
Yeah.
I think what stands out for me so much in this is the violence in the non-sexual act of it, right? So a lot of what I would go so far as to say most of his abuse of you or his reprimanding of you or his big issues with you was around your sexual life or the way he couldn't express his violent inclinations in your sexual life, and maybe that you had, had more adventurous sex in your youth for whatever reason. We don't need to talk about whether or not that is true, but certainly in his perception and his abuse of you, that was the narrative. That these other men had got to experience this side of you that was more violent in the bedroom, that was more allowing of abuse in the bedroom or physical violence in the sexual act than he had ever had with you. And that seemed to be a massive problem. And so you're in this setting, which is quite a romantic one. You've had a lovely evening. You're in a lovely hotel room and, he goes down this path. And it's not the first time that he's done this. And there's a message that he sent you. I think it might be later, but I think what I'm starting to understand is these interrogations and his abuse of you around your not wanting to let him be violent with you in your sexual life is in replacement of the fact that he couldn't hit you in your sexual life. I think his violent outbursts using his words were a replacement for that. He was getting off when he was abusing you. It was a replacement for what he wanted to be doing for you in the bedroom. And the message is essentially, I think that you had said to him that you loved him and wanted to spend the rest of your life with him. And he says, you're fourth in rank, different, smaller dick, less organized, less successful, drug addicted, sexually restricted, deviant, unwelcome, statistical outlier, overly lefty, naive, harmful to women and children, intentionally sociopathic, shorter, browner, smoother, untattooed, sexually less potent, less masculine, most like your father and brother, cheating, meth lover, children, gay, unable to empathize, does not know what love is, woman wannabe, time wasting, undeserving, unwelcome, unfulfilled potential, shameful, not fun, coercive, dangerous, scary, sick, lying, untrustworthy boyfriend who you fuck barely at all, you want to marry? When you do, you marry me. Will you fuck me only in a particular way because more manly men get to fuck you however, but little me needs to be restricted still? Or do some privileges come back to me? How about anal? What about slaps? What else? Can I get insert other names and 20 more numbers? You have them and keep them and peruse them. I need them now so I can ask for my sex life back. I will never be better than this to you. You cheated on me the whole time you were comparing me sexually to your ex. It's just what's fucked up is that we think about violence in terms of, skin hitting skin and breaking flesh and that this is incredibly violent. And sexual violence is only okay if you consent to it. And consent, there's only one barometer for consent, and that is a yes. And you had not consented to it. And his way of getting off was to violently, verbally abuse you so that he could derive the same satisfaction he would have had if he'd been able to hit you in the jaw.
For me at this point, I had completely lost myself. And the person that I had committed myself to and was meant to be the forever love of was reducing me to those words. And I think this is the realization that I've had that I spoke about at the beginning, right? I was all in this relationship. I was in for love. I don't think he was in it ever. Because how do you say that? How do you sit in a room with the person that you love and watch them be a shell of themselves? And I was looking like a shell of myself at this point. He would have known how unwell I was. He knew. I was explicitly telling him at this point, I'm really unwell. Something's not right with me. It took me a minute to see it, but I think now I see it. I think this is a person that is driven by their own desires and their own desires only. And it's quite interesting. It's not interesting. It's so contradictory that he opens it with saying that, he's too lefty, as if he's
I
this
know.
big humanitarian, and then he finishes it and it's just like he doesn't even care to get it right. He's just. And so I think you're right. A really great conclusion is that I'm sitting on a bed that he literally could have been having sex in with me while he's abusing me because he wasn't able to have sex with me, but he chose to start that argument. I would have given anything to have been intimate with him at that point because all I was hoping for was love and connection. It's all I wanted. And so, that's reflected in how the rest of this night even plays out
Yeah.
because I was very well aware that he wasn't down for my sobbing, because last time it happened, he kicked me out of his house. So I lay down on the bed and I was, coping, and he refused to lie in the bed with me. He grabbed a pillow and he lay on the floor. And all I wanted was connection. All I wanted was it to be over. He would not break the hostility that was in that room. He just wouldn't let it break. And so he was lying on the floor and I was sort of, sniffling, and he didn't want to hear it. And I just said, "Can you please come and lie with me at least, please?" And he wouldn't. And he then started getting the same worked up aggressive that he'd gotten in the past, where he'd said he had dissociated. And he hadn't done this in a minute, but he started doing the same violence on himself. He started getting quite violent with himself. He started hitting himself. He was throwing himself around. And then eventually he drags himself into the bed with me, but is, showing me that he's very reluctantly there. And I was really mindful of upsetting him, so we'd been lying down for a bit. I think he actually fell asleep. I think the guy had a good time and fell asleep. And so I got up because I couldn't sleep, obviously. And so I just went and sat in the bathroom and cried the rest of the night. I think at one point I just lay down on the floor and was like, "Okay, I guess I'm sleeping here now." And I just sobbed. And I think he'd woken and realized I wasn't in bed, and he got up and he came into the bathroom, and I'll never forget this moment because it was just so fucked up. He grabbed me and he's like, "Come back to bed now. It's over. It's done now. This never has to happen again." And I hate that phrase. I hate what he said there. Like that had to happen, really? And it's done and it's never gonna happen again. Good job. It's done now. And so I end up going back to the bed with him, and he still was quite cold. I think he had his back to me and held my hand from facing the other way. And I didn't sleep a wink that night. I think it was early hours of the morning anyway, and we had to get up quite early to leave. And so we woke up in the morning and, I thought it was done. I thought it never had to happen again. I thought it was over, but it wasn't. And, he started calling me a narcissist, and that I was just horrible, and that I could never resolve anything, and I was just in it for myself, and I could never put myself in his shoes because I was this big narc. So we took separate cars to the concert, and we were meeting his ex-wife there, and so she had dropped them off at the concert, and it was such a weird moment because I was also really panicking about seeing his ex-wife because I knew what I looked like. I knew I didn't look okay, and I didn't want her to see me like that, or at least I didn't want her to see me like that alone with him. And so I sent him a text message from my car, and I just said, "Hey, I'm just gonna wait for my friends, and once they're here, we'll come over and join you." And, he then got angry at me, and, I think the message was something like, "Oh, poor you, having to cope with having been a liar and, this horrible girl." And then he just said, "Stay the fuck away from us," essentially. And so then I panicked and I was like, "Okay, I'm coming now." And I didn't wait for my friends. I immediately went over to where he was with his children and his ex-wife. And it was raining. It was pouring down rain, and I remember it was just really strange. And look, I don't know what she was thinking at this point, but I recall I had left my umbrella in my car, and she said to one of her children, "Hey, why don't you give Jessie the umbrella?" And it was really strange because they didn't have one. She didn't have, and I think, I don't know if she knew that something was wrong, but it certainly felt like I think she knew I wasn't okay. And so the minute we walked into that concert though, and my friends arrived, everything changed. He started treating me like I was a queen, and it was so confusing for my body. He was the best dad in the world. He was loving me. If you were to ask my friends, they would say to you, "Oh, this is the best guy. He loves you so much. Like, I can't explain it. So much affection, so much love. And the minute that day was over, it was like the switch turned back on and the love had gone. And I don't know. I don't.
I think it's safe to say at this point that we're on a journey towards the end. So why don't we skip to the final pages?
After this weekend, nothing changed, but a lot happened. And a lot happened for me. I was seeing a therapist. I had started antidepressants because I just needed to take control of my anxiety. Was also dealing with an infection that hadn't cleared up since the chlamydia, and so that was just really bringing me down. I think my doctor had put me on a bunch of different medications to try and solve it, so I was taking a lot of antibiotics and different things, and I couldn't hold it together anymore. He was really messing with me at this point. So he was claiming to be quite depressed and suicidal. He was really leading into everything's a disaster and I'm very busy and I've got so much to worry about and all these lawyers and all these issues. At the same time, he was spending a lot of time with all of these strange people and he'd be messaging me very late in the evening, and I was concerned he wasn't sleeping at all. Like, he'd be awake at 2, 3 in the morning most nights doing God knows what. And so I just the panic in me was taking over. It had taken over my body. I'm just gonna say it was taking over. It had taken over. I w I was trying to reassure him how much I loved him all the time. And then he told me he was gonna refuse to talk to me and that he was blocking all contact with me because he couldn't text me anymore. And then he would be calling me manipulative because I wasn't contacting him and it was playing games with him. It was just getting insane. He kept reminding me that he wasn't coping with me.
I think I'll reflect just on this time because, in this month, you weren't really talking to me, and I won't speak for anybody else, but you weren't talking to me about a lot of what was going on, and I totally understand why. But around this time is when you started just saying things are really hard. Things are a bit shitty. You never said anything that was very pointed or vindictive or anything. Just that things are really hard. And I think I was trying to be a little bit subtle and say things like, well, relationships are always hard, but you'll know you've got your person if you can lay all your shit bare and, have them reflect theirs back at you and find a pathway through and choose to make that your foundation. And so you were very quietly starting to reach out and say, this relationship is really taking a toll on me, but it was all within a couple of days of the last days was when you started to use this kind of language.
I think I knew I was close to crumble at that point. I don't think I could hold on much longer. I knew it was coming. I wasn't coping at all. And,
You were working a full-time job. You were being encouraged to understand that sleep is overrated and engaging in, verbal and text abuse into the early hours of the morning. You were doing admin for him and you were trying to keep him out of trouble because let's not forget the drug charges and let's not forget everything else that was going through. You were keeping him afloat and you were barely keeping you afloat. You were living two lives in one body.
That
Yeah.
I think that perfectly
right?
describes it. It feels like I was treading water in the Pacific and he was jumping on my shoulders while I was
Mhm.
doing it. And he was doing nothing to help himself. Nothing to help himself. And nothing I could say would change his mind or make him change his behaviors. It's really hard to explain what it feels like to have someone reprimand you and then put you down and then abuse you and then jump back in and ask for your help. There's a
Yeah.
text message in there where he kind of says to me, "The least you can do while you're hurting me is help me do my admin so I don't drown." And I just look, that's not verbatim, but it's just that was the attitude at this point. That was how brazen he was being about his control and just just his I think I've said a few times, like, his hatred of me. Some things had happened, I had to go and support him with some things, but I wasn't going to his house at this point. So, I would go there and I'd just drop him off or pick him up. I wouldn't go in. I refused to because there were people living there that I just was really uncomfortable with. But these people would, like, come out and watch me. And, you know, there's one particular man who I think we'd talked about earlier had moved in. He was previously homeless, and this was the guy who was meant to be, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke. He was very clearly a heavy drug user. And so he's standing out watching me as I'm sitting in the car with my boyfriend after having had a really stressful evening. And then this guy was also texting him 24/7. And, they were this guy was apparently helping him with these mysterious applications as well. They were working overtime 24/7 to try and get this done because he just needed to get money to survive and so we could get past all of this. And things were getting really tense with his ex-wife. I think she was also observing a lot of things I was, and she wanted to protect her children, and rightly so. And, there was a part he did come to my house and spend the entire weekend, which was quite rare at this point. So that was 2 whole days, just us at my home, and it was actually really beautiful. We just slept, and I hadn't slept like that for a long time, and I don't think he had either. But, even when he was there, he's constantly getting text messages from this Sarah woman and this other guy, and it's just constantly them there. And I think that weekend we had planned to have a lunch with Wayne and Wayne's partner and my mum, and, it was a weird moment, and I think that was the moment where my mum really started to observe how bad things were getting. She's, like, looking back on it, and she was reflecting and said to me, "You were sitting there stroking his arm." And it was
Mm.
like I was just trying to keep him calm at the table. And it's just really odd behaviors. And, I could go through all of the things that happened in this last month, and I think each one would be just as confusing and shocking as the next, but that would probably take a month to talk through it. And so after the evening at the hotel, I think it was pretty clear that I was pretty much gone in terms of my well-being, and I was really struggling with sleep. And he would go into these places where he was being really supportive of me. We weren't spending a lot of time together, but I was leaning on him for support, and I was being really open with him. I was telling him I was unwell. I was telling him how afraid I was because I wasn't sleeping, and I was getting scared of not sleeping. And I was scared because I was afraid people might see that I wasn't sleeping and that I wasn't coping. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to go to work. I was afraid my mum would see. And so I remember one night I had called him, and he was helping me to get through this panic, this fear of sleeplessness. And he's telling me, you know, "It's okay. You don't really need that much sleep. You're gonna be okay. Just stop panicking about it." And he was really sweet and gentle and talked me all the way through. And then it got to the point where I had to fall asleep, and, after we'd hung up, and he was texting me, and he's like, "It's gonna be okay." And he's like, then he tells me this woman was coming over and he was gonna go downstairs and help because she needed his help. And then I start panicking again because I'm like, "What is this woman doing? I thought she had children. Why is she at your house at midnight on a Tuesday needing your help?" And so then I start panicking again, and so I think he called me, and then he just stayed on the phone with me until I fell asleep. And I felt kind of relieved by that. He had been really gentle for the first time in a while and really supportive of my needs, I guess, which was strange. And so the next morning I got up, and I remember where I was when I sent this message. I'm walking across the bridge to go to my office, and I sent him a message that says, "Darling," because I think I wanted to tell him that I slept most of the night. I think I was excited about being able to be like, "Hey, I actually slept. Thank you." And I just get a text message back from him that says, "What?" And my my stomach just fell down, and it was like panic stations immediately. And so I say, "I love you." And he's like, "Right, I love you too." And then I just said to him, "Are you okay?" And he's like, "I'm okay. Are you okay?" And I was like, "Are you angry at me?" And he's like, "I am a little angry at you." And then I called him to try and understand what I could have possibly done in my sleep to have upset him. And he told me he'd had a dream. And then he spent the rest
Ugh.
of the day explaining to me the details of this dream.
Spoiler
And
alert, the details of the dream were essentially a parade of every sexual partner you've ever had in front of him comparing themselves to him.
it's kinda just, what do you do
That's
with
right,
that?
isn't it? Is that right?
Something like that. Every
Oh,
male
oh,
representation of
God.
everything in my life was in this dream. And so then literally all day, and I remember this day well because we were having a team planning day, and so I was kinda like, I couldn't hide because I was trapped in a room with my colleagues working on this strategy, and I I couldn't hear properly. I couldn't see. My vision was really blurry. I was getting aura migraines. Uh, I just was hanging out for the end of the day, and my phone kept vibrating, and I knew what was going on in my phone, and so incredibly distracted all day, incredibly unwell. So I got home that evening, and I
Well, you
think
called me on your way home. You called me on your way home because you know that I love a conversation about women's health, and it started with that, but I could see you weren't well, and I didn't know how to talk to you about it. I just it was a minefield for a number of different reasons, but you told me this story, high level. There wasn't an awful lot of emotion attached to it, but you did tell me this story, and you just said, "I'm so unwell, and I cannot cope. I do not know what I'm doing. I cannot cope. Like, I just cannot cope with it." And we made a few jokes about how probiotics probably wouldn't fix it. And I think I just said to you one more time, you have to you talk about forever love. Is this the kind of conflict you can have for forever? Because your conflict style is part of your love style. Can you carry on having this kind of conflict forever? Can you breach this point? And there wasn't any sort of accusation. It was very philosophical, sort of just talking about the fact that you were tired, and you were so tired. You were so tired. I was concerned that you were driving home. That's how tired you sounded, and you were. And you said to me, "I just need to sleep. I just need to sleep. I can't talk to him about it tonight. I just need to sleep."
and I think that was the words I continued to say all night to
Mm.
him was, "I just need to sleep." And I said to him, "I'm quite unwell. I just need to sleep." I think he called me and at one point suggested that I take myself up to a psychiatric ward after taunting me all day. I should have. I should have fucking done it, and I should have told them while I was there. I didn't, because there's still part of me that was trying to hide, and I just wanted to rest, and I kept telling him that, "I just need to rest. Please let me rest." And so I think that night I kinda just zoned out. I detached myself from it, and I was, yeah, trying to sleep, and I couldn't. And so I recall I leant on YouTube to help me fall asleep. And so I remember watching some strange videos, but a lot of true crime. And so I remember before I fell asleep, there was a true crime story that came up that was this woman and her son were in fact murdered by her partner, his stepfather, because the woman had discovered that he was a male escort. And so he panicked and murdered them both. And then I remember waking up to my phone ringing. And I looked at my phone and it was a no caller ID. And so I was kind of like, who's calling me? But then I was kind of like, what's gone wrong? Is something wrong with Danny? And then I noticed I had an email. I didn't answer the no caller ID, of course. And then I had an email and it was from Danny and it said, "My phone's blown up. What's your number? I'm trying to get through." Something like that. And so I tried to call him and he didn't answer on his phone. And then I emailed him my number, and then he called me again from this no caller ID. And I could hear him and this guy who had moved into his house driving. They were in a car driving somewhere. And this was late at night. This was bedtime late at night. And I just said to him, "Can you just let me sleep?" And I think I just said it with a bit of attitude because I was so mad. I finally gotten to sleep. And what's he do? He wakes me up for no
Mm.
reason. Why was he calling me? He had no reason to be calling me. And then I get these emails and he's saying something like that I was withdrawing from him and that he just wanted to be close to me and I wouldn't let him be close to me. And I just lay there and I thought about it for a while and I just thought, what the fuck am I doing? And I then wrote him an email in return, and the email just said, "This is all wrong. I don't want any of this." And then I said, "I don't want you." I listed all the people. I said, "I don't want them in my life at all. You have chosen that. I do not want this. I am done. We are over. I will still help you with your legal issues, but as far as I'm concerned, I can't be in a relationship with you." End of email. Immediately fell asleep. It was like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. So I fell asleep and I woke up in the morning to my phone ringing, and it was a number that I hadn't recognized. And, I don't answer numbers I don't know, but I certainly don't let them go. And so I put it into Google, and I was quite shocked by what I saw because I hadn't seen the number before, but I'd certainly seen the torso of the man I saw in the escort ad that was attached to that phone number. And I opened it up, and there's Danny's body holding on to a woman barely dressed, advertising services as a bisexual couple. And I just,
Using photos that you had taken of him across your relationship.
it just was. Uh,
Now, let's
so
not sugarcoat this. Ago. It wasn't one ad. It wasn't two ads. It wasn't three ads. It wasn't four ads. It was many, many, many ads with many, many, many videos advertising many, many, many services that are time and date stamped across your relationship.
I think the earliest ad I found, because it wasn't hard, you're right, after scratching the surface, it all just fell out. And yeah, I think the earliest ad I found was February of 2024. He'd been doing it
Oh.
all year. And so the number rings again. And I answered it and I said, "Danny, you fucked up." And he sounded confused and I said, "What's this number?" And I think he had meant to put it on no caller ID, but maybe had forgotten. And so then, he immediately goes into damage control. And what did he do? He immediately told me to call the police because Laura, the girl that had been tearing his life apart, had been putting fake ads up on the internet of him. And I just was,
It's like, all right, mate, you call the police. If
yeah.
that's the case, why do you have to call and let them know that this person is destroying him? It doesn't make any sense. If this is something
But you know what's really beautiful about that moment? As soon as he said that, I just was like myself again for a minute.
Yeah.
And I just said to him, "You know what? If I ever find that you have put any images or videos or anything of me on the internet, I will call the police and I will take you down." And I just felt so empowered to protect myself at that point.
Mhm.
And it got real devastating after that, but
Mhm.
it was just a moment of real finding my people again and finding myself again. Oh no, I'm getting emotional because
Yeah. Sorry. Don't fucking apologize.
I think
Here's the thing. We have looked at every ad We have looked at every video. We have looked at every lie. We have looked at every text message. We've looked at every falsified document. We have looked at everything, and we can laugh, but it doesn't change the fact that it happened to you. It sounds like a joke, and sometimes when we talk about it, it's an arrhythmic thing. This shouldn't happen to a person. Not only was it that this is not an aspersion on what he was choosing to do with his body and his own truth and his own sexual identity. That is his to decide. The issue is your entire relationship was based on a lack of consent. The fact that you found a video, and this is just the earliest video that we could find on the internet, dated February of 2024, means that essentially for the entire relationship that you were supporting him through a terminal cancer diagnosis, that you were propping him up through dissociative identity disorder, that you were burying all of this down so that he didn't lose his career, that you were supporting him through a meth addiction, that you were supporting him through all of these bizarre things that were happening to him legally, that you were working through a gang rape claim that he was making. And those are just the cliff notes. All of that was being done, embedded on a massive fucking lie. And if you want to go a little bit deeper and look at what was happening to your physical body, all of that had been done to you. You cannot consent to something that you were not aware of. And this deception was so deep. And it is just the tip, because this was the gateway to learning everything. This was the gateway to knowing all of the truths. But this exact moment was when you were at your very, very lowest. And I don't know, I hate the fact that he tried to lie.
I hate that too. And he tried really hard, and he tried different angles. And
for a long time. And he still
For a
tried to
long time.
blame other people.
Yep. And I will guarantee you, if anyone was to ask him to this day, he would say, I never did it. Yeah, or that was from before you. They're just, and that's okay. I don't need his truth anymore because I know the truth, because I know how badly he hurt me, and I know how unwell he made me. Regardless of, all of these extracurricular activities that I had no idea he was actually doing, he was just hurting me. And I think that this was the biggest blessing, finding that information, because it burst the bubble. And I really did start looking then. I stopped putting my head in the sand, and I looked at everything forensically. And I wanted to know the truth at that point. I wanted to know everything. And you're right, we have found out most of it, I think. I don't want to know what else he was getting up to that I don't know about. From that morning, I think I realized, and look, don't get me wrong, the year after was a hard time with him. I think what I found out that morning was a blessing, because I think I truly hit my threshold. And when I say threshold, I think the humiliation wound that caused me was just too far of a stretch to cope with, that I think I had no choice but to not look back anymore. I left him 4 times truly across that year, and this was the last time.
Next time on Beyond Curious, let's finally talk about the truth.